Alrighty, so I just want to do some more sculpting with you guys, right? Remember, at this point we have our model built. We UV unwrapped it. In this case, I kind of turned the crab gear off because we're going to come back and do some sculpting on the crab gear later on as well. But remember, you can always name these, right? If you double click on them, you can give them names. You can turn the visibility off and on right here. And one of the things I did was I made sure that I'm in the sculpting workspace, right? So remember, we have these kind of layout workspaces here. We use modeling beforehand, then UV editing, and now we're in sculpting. And you see it brings up the sculpting brushes here, your sculpting strength, right? A couple of other features which we'll see a little bit later on. And of course, we have our modifiers, right? Our blue wrench. And the modifier we added here was multi-resolution, right? Because this allows us to sculpt. Now, once again, you'll see kind of these things look a little bit different in Blender 2.9. They kind of streamlined them. All the same functionalities there. In fact, in Blender 2.9, the actual sculpt level works better, right? They had it working fine beforehand, and then somewhere in the 2.8 series, there was like a bug that was making stuff go weird. So they kind of disabled this function for a little while, but it's back. And this allows you to properly go up and down your resolutions, right? But you'll notice that this will only work properly in 2.9. So you see how you can kind of go down and work at these lower levels and then kind of go back up. Now, one of the things you'll notice when you have the multi-resolution up is you'll see that there is a subdivisions tab. And this is where you can subdivide. This is where you actually subdivide the mesh to give it more geometry. Now, we apply a subdivision surface modifier, right, earlier on when we're working. And what that's really doing is that's taking each quad and it's breaking it up into 4 smaller quads, but it's doing it virtually, right? It's not doing it for real. You can't edit those extra polygons, but you can visually see them. And it kind of averages the positions of the new vertices, particularly at corners, and that creates that rounded shape, right? So it's a great way to kind of build a character or creature or car or spaceship that's got a lot of roundness and curvature without having to add a million edge loops manually. And then we apply it. Well, subdivision surfaces really is like subdivide, right? Where it's taking a quad and it's dividing it into 4 smaller quads, right? And of course, it rounds off the positions of the new vertices at corners, and this does the same thing, particularly if you don't use linear. But you'll notice that you can do regular subdivide, and you can actually do linear, which subdivides it, but it doesn't round the shape off. So like if you want to do sculpting on like a desk or a building wall without it being rounded, you could use that. So the subdivisions area is where you can actually subdivide, but this actually does it for real, right? There's actually all those real polygons there. That's why we can do a lot more sculpting with it, right? Remember, one of the new things we have is we can go to the this little triangle here, and we can turn statistics on, and that shows us our polygon counts. In fact, with 3 subdivision levels, we can see we're now at 179,000 triangles, right? Well, I'm going to subdivide it again. So we're at 4. I usually like to turn that one up so that when I turn off the sculpting tools, I'll still see the proper same level. Now we're at 716,000 triangles, right? And this will allow us to go in and do even more sculpting, right? Now remember, we kind of started off using just the draw, right? The regular default sculpt one. Now, if you've got a Wacom tablet and a Wacom pen, you can definitely use strength pressure, right? We'll have it off for now because I'm just using a mouse here. But it's cool. It's something you can turn off and on. You can turn the strength down a lot, right? You'll even see that with your tools on, you can go here, the little wrench and screwdriver, and you can see the exact all options right here. And one of the things you'll see is that you can have a unified strength so that every brush uses the same strength. Same thing with the radius. I actually like to turn that off, right? Because then that way, I can have this set to a lower strength, but then I can go to, say, my smooth brush, and I can turn that off, and I can have that set to a lower strength also. So it's actually neat that Blender can do that, but you might not want it on. And you see it's got the same thing for radius. So Blender's actually got some really, really, really cool features once you know about them. You can turn them off and on. Kind of optional up to you guys, but I like to kind of have that off. But remember, the blue wrench is your modifiers, and we've seen several of them. Multi-resolution is the one we're currently working with. But we've seen mirror and subdivision surface. In this case, because we're in sculpting, you can't really use the mirror with that. So by default, though, when you go into sculpting, it actually turns this symmetry on, right? And you see it's right here, so you can pick the axis you want, things like that. You can actually even do radial symmetry, although it only works on stuff that's centered to the world. Won't really work on other parts, but it is neat that that functionality is there. But by default, that's usually already on. You don't have to worry about it too much, particularly when you go specifically to the sculpting workspace. Also, usually when you go right to the sculpting workspace, the sculpt mode's on. You'll see there's a little quick key for it called 5. So you can actually turn sculpt tools on even when you're in the modeling viewport, right? So keep in mind that you don't always have to switch to sculpting to use some of your sculpting tools if you don't want to. So there's a quick key for that 5. So I'm going to go back up to the draw brush. And you see I've got a lower strength. It's right here. You can type in the numbers. And remember, left mouse button, and I did subdivide it once more, right? So we did open the subdivision subdivide. And I can pull this out more, right? I can hold down control, because remember control inverses, right? And you see I can push this in more here. And so we can define this grab shell even more, right? I can go in here and I can pull these out a little bit more. Maybe hold down control, because remember control pushes in, and regular left mouse button pushes out. So you just turn a brush on, and you just left mouse button, hold down left mouse button, right? Hold down control left mouse button, and that will push it in. So by default, the tool is pulling outward. That's what the plus is, right? See the plus right up here? That means it's pulling the polygons outward, right? The minus means it's going to push them inward. Generally, it's using that normal direction that they have, right? The polygons kind of point a certain direction. That's their normal direction. But there's quickies to that, right? Control will inverse it. Now, Shift actually turns your smooth tool on, right? There is actually a brush specifically for this, but Shift will actually turn that on also, and it will use the properties you have set for this smooth brush. So if I hold down Shift, you see how I can kind of soften this a little bit? See how it's changing just subtly, right? But I can hold down Control to push in here. And you see sometimes it gets a little lumpy. So you hold down, and remember that's Control to inverse it, right? Basically inverses the brush so it pushes in. But Shift smooths it, right? See how it kind of softens it? It can allow you to kind of get rid of some of the lumps. Makes the transitions nicer, right? You see how it kind of softens the area? So we could easily just come in here and just start to sculpt kind of some of these forms out, right? To bring out some of the shape. So just left mouse click, left mouse click. If I want, Control to inverse a little bit, right? Now, one of the cool things actually is we've seen a little bit, and I've talked about it a little bit already, Shift if you want to smooth, soften stuff a little bit there, is that in normal modeling, if you have something selected, right, even if it was the last thing you tweaked, right, usually when you tweak something and edge your face, it kind of keeps that selected until you select something else, which is actually really cool in Blender when you get used to it. When you hit F, it actually uses that, right? So that's kind of a neat thing about Blender when you get used to it, F frame selection. It actually does something very similar with the sculpting tool. So if I hit F on my keyboard, you notice it sets my camera rotate around where I was working at. Now, how much it zooms in or out is dependent on the brush size. Now, of course, that's radius, so we can turn that radius up a lot more to have a bigger brush. And you see how F doesn't zoom in at all on there? So depending on your brush size, the bracket keys also, right? And now you see, if I zoom in a little bit, hit F, kind of sets it up. So it's kind of neat. Whatever the last area you sculpted on, it'll kind of focus on. So if I start to sculpt here, then I hit F, you see how it kind of zooms in a little bit, but sets your camera rotate around there. So F actually does something very similar with your sculpting brushes. The radius controls here. The bracket keys, right? They're next to P and in between Enter. And there's two of them, right? One's kind of for one side, one's for the right side, one's for the left side. Those actually will allow you to go up in brush size by units of 5. So keep that in mind. It's kind of neat. And you see I can go in here and I could just slowly kind of add this extra form, right? So this is allowing us to really kind of get this to look more dynamic, look cooler, have a bit more dynamic shape for our forms, right? So take advantage of the sculpting, right? That's kind of really what we want to do with this project, is we really want to get you guys all the basics, right? Really get you guys to see at its core level how many of these tools work, right? So just regular draw brush, right, the default one. Left click, drag, right, holding down left mouse button. If you hold down Shift, right, it'll allow you to smooth, so you can kind of soften and blend and fade these into the surface area more. But you'll notice how we can kind of really define some kind of form more, right? Control will inverse, right? If we wanted to inverse a little bit, we can. Shift smooths. You see how it kind of just softens and kind of blends that. I can even go in here and hold down Control to kind of inverse to define a little bit of the chin here for this guy. Shift to smooth, right? So it softens that. And this regular left click to kind of bring it out. There we go. Shift for smooth to soften that a little bit. Maybe a little bit of Control to kind of bring this form up here. Shift to smooth. And one of the things you could do, particularly if you're working in 2.9, is maybe it's not smoothing quite as much as I want. I can go down one level to level 3, and then hold down Shift to smooth, and you'll see it'll actually allow us to smooth more, right? And I can even go down, say, one more level to level 2, and you see how it's pulling out less polygons. So if I want to kind of pull that chin out a little bit more, like so, maybe a little bit of Shift for smooth. You see how it does that, but then I can go back up to the highest level, and you see how it actually propagates that through the rest of it. This is what multi-resolution sculpting does. Some of you guys that took my class with me last year remember Mudbox doing some of this functionality, right? So Blender has that full, that's why it's called the multi-resolution modifier, because what it lets you do is create multiple resolutions, subdivisions, right, of this mesh to get more polygons. And you can work between those levels. So you can go back to a lower level and do some shaping, and it'll propagate up to the higher levels, and vice versa. All right? And that gives you a lot of new control over how you want to approach this. Now, I could probably put a nostril here. So I'm still just using the standard draw brush, right? Just trying to get you guys used to the multi-resolution controls, understanding Control and Shift. In this case, I want to push in for a nostril. So I'm going to hold down Control and just left-click drag, and I can start to make kind of a nostril. I'm not sure why a crab has a nostril, but go with it, right? It'll be fun to sculpt with. And then, of course, I can just do left mouse click to kind of define that form a little bit more. Now, we don't want to get too crazy with this. I'm going to hold down Control a little more to bring this in a little bit there, because we're not planning on retoppling this, right? So don't really change the shape that much, right? We're going to let this, the normal map do a lot of the work for this for us. But you see how we can kind of get in here and just do some cool little shaping to kind of add a little bit more kind of nuance to it. Shift to smooth, maybe bring that out a little bit. Hold down Control to inverse. There we go. And you see how slowly this actually takes on more and more form, right? We're getting some definition kind of in the where the body and the shell connect up, right? We're getting kind of a little bit of a nostril, a little more mouth shape here. And that's just with the draw brush. Sometimes we'll Control to inverse it to push inward instead of pull outward. Shift will allow us to smooth it, right? And if we want, we can go up and down those levels, particularly if you're in 2.9. 2.83, it was kind of broken. Not the multi-resolution sculpting, but the actual ability to work at the different levels. They reworked the multi-resolution feature to make it even faster and kind of fix that minor issue that they were having with it. So this is some of the neat things you could do in adjusting these forms. Now, you have a lot of other brushes here, right? And you can see kind of down here we get to the yellow ones, and these are slightly different ones, like multiplane scrape, pinch. There's one called grab, right? And I'm going to make my brush size bigger. Remember the bracket keys, but it is also just radius. And you'll notice what we can do with the grab tool is we can just kind of grab sections and move them, right? So I can kind of move out a little bit of this kind of mouth here a little bit if I want to, right? There we go. We can maybe move the nostril a little bit. So this gives you the ability to kind of go back in here and do some shaping, right? So you see how you can kind of push in. So it's kind of like a move tool, actually. It's got a brush. Whatever the brush touches, it'll try to kind of drag it, grab it, and move it along. So this could be a cool way to make some shape adjustments if you want to, like maybe that one in or out, right? So kind of neat that you have some of that functionality if you want to take advantage of it, right? I can kind of maybe bring the belly down a little bit more. Shift to smooth, right, because that still works there. Also, like we said before, we could go down levels, right, to say level 2. And see how the smooth works a little bit better there? Shift. So shift actually is always smooth, right? Shift is always the smooth function of this. So whatever brush you're in, if you hold down Shift, it's going to use the smooth. But you see how I can kind of go down to those lower levels, and sometimes doing large-scale shape changes like this are actually really cool, kind of at the lower level. Now, you shouldn't change the overall silhouette and shape too much from what you built it as. That can cause a little bit of UV distortion, although it should be fairly fine for this. But keep in mind that you want this to be in good shape and not radically alter it too much once you've got UVs on it. One of the cool things, though, is we can go back up to higher levels, and you see how it propagates through. But there's actually another cool feature that you can apply on this, right, from the subdivision surface modifier. Now I'm going to go down to kind of the lowest levels, right? And see 0 is our low res. And you'll notice that it's not really propagating a lot of that stuff down to there. So if you actually go into shape here, you'll see there's something called apply base. And what it does is it actually applies that shaping you did at the higher levels to the low resolution base. So that your low res actually eventually when you bake down the normal map will have that shape adjustment you made to it also, which is actually really cool. And you see I can go back up and that's all still there as well, right? It's just that now the base shape has that also, right? That low resolution has it. So really cool features, right? You have the ability to go up and down your resolutions. There's subdivide right here is important shape. Now, like I said, I'm in 2.9. You guys should be hopefully getting 2.9 this week and already installed. So yours will look like this, right? But if it doesn't, all this stuff is in there. That actually is even there. It just doesn't work, right, in 2.83. And it's just that the modifier displays, these right here, are a little bit different, right? All the features are still there, but it's just it's streamlined to be a little cleaner, basically. But Shape's got that reshape feature, which is really cool, kind of, or apply base, right? And it applies whatever sculpting you did at the higher levels. It tries to apply as much of that to the lower levels, particularly when it comes to general shape changes, which is really, really cool. One last thing before we're done for today is the crease brush, right? Crease brush. And I'm going to have my bracket keys, right? Remember the brackets are right next to P, right, on the keyboard. I'm going to make it pretty small here. And you see we can have it have a pressure strength and all that stuff. And if we want to go here, the properties, we can kind of see if anything's linked, which it isn't. Usually when that's off, it's off. But you'll notice that you can go to the screwdriver and wrench up here, right, kind of the white ones next to each other. And that brings up your properties for your tool, right, instead of just the modifier stuff. In this case, I'm good there, but I just want to kind of point that out. What's cool about crease is it actually pushes in and does a pinching function, right? If I go to brush here, you'll see it's actually got a pinch set up on it. And what's cool about this is if I start to just left-click sculpt, particularly if you have enough polygons, like if you have only like 1 or 2 levels and you have like 30, 40,000 triangles, crease is not going to show up that well, right? Crease works a lot better when you've got hundreds of thousands or even millions of polygons, right? But you'll see what's really cool about crease is it does exactly that. It's a great way to kind of add like fatty creases and wrinkles and all that stuff. So you might find yourself just really wanting to start to explore just using your crease brush to enhance some stuff. All right, so I can get in here and I can enhance that a little bit. Bring this out, maybe even add a little bit of a crease there. Kind of in there. Of course, it has its own control inverse function as well as shift. But you see how we can kind of go in here and really, and of course F works with this, right? And you see we can kind of define that more, right? So start to take advantage of some of these brushes, right? There is the crease brush, which can allow you to enhance and kind of, if you will, wrinkle up or fold up, right, some of these areas. So remember, you have things like the grab brush if you want to take advantage for general shaping. You have the draw brush, which we've been using up to this point, and will work well for a lot of your stuff. But then there's also the crease. And you can always apply to base if you've done some significant shape changes to the overall silhouette of the model. And you can go up and down your sculpt resolution levels. And remember, you have to subdivide, right? You have to go into subdivisions here, subdivide, to get you more resolution. But now you can start to see how this is coming along pretty cool, right? Now if I go back down, of course, that's what our low res looks like. You see how the crease just wouldn't be supported in that? But remember, we're eventually going to bake out a normal map for this, right? So I'm going to save that. And I think that's a good place to stop for this video.